After riding through the forest for a few hours, Vlad signaled me to join him as lead. We had entered the small village of Anzai when he said,
I assume you may need some relationship advice, given you're still a boy and slightly immature.
I looked over at him, confused and silent. He kept his eyes on the trail ahead and continued.
If you want to show her you have feelings for her, a simple gift may help.
He pointed to a small jeweler's shop up ahead. It was tucked away enough for her not to notice. I started to trail off away from the group when he quietly repeated,
Remember, small and simple.
I carefully dismounted my horse and walked to the shop. There were dark gray cobblestones around a large wooden door without windows to peer in. This building wasn't the brightest. I pushed on the wooden door with my hand. Prepared for the unknown, the door creaked open. When I walked in, dim lights appeared in every corner of the room. It was quaint and quiet, nothing like the chaotic shops in Morang. A small old man was sitting behind the glass counter with a long stem pipe that hung from his stern mouth. He observed every slow step I took towards the glass counter. To my right, a young woman with pale complexion and long silver hair that tucked behind her pointed ears. She looked away from me as my eyes fell on her. These two curious individuals were the only people in the shop. A pale elfess? I thought as I walked past her. She kept her pale face away from me as I passed. I looked through the diamond rings. I didn't know what size to get or what color diamond. There are gold rings with rubies, silver rings with sapphires, and a variety of loose diamonds to choose from. I moved to a shelf of earrings, but I wasn't certain if her ears were pierced. I thought back about our long conversation in bed. The way she motioned her hands when she spoke or the excitement in her bright eyes. I could only imagine her eyes as they were the highlight of her features. I tried to remember her beauty in other situations until I felt a large hand grab my shoulder. I quickly turned to see Mirlise's guard. He pointed to the necklaces, a large and dull finger. I looked through the silver and gold-plated necklaces. In the back of the set, I noticed a necklace that didn't have a price tag on it. It didn't appear to be for sale, but it radiated with a unique shine. The chain was gold-plated with an ember gem and a silver cradle. That necklace, I said. Is that necklace for sale? The old man glared at me with his long stem pipe still hanging from his stern mouth.
Let me see your hands.
He said. Confused, I took my gloves off and showed him my hands. He grabbed them and turned my palms up. He looked closely at my palms.
A member of the Red Guard.
He said. I nodded in agreement. Yes. He looked at me and said,
For you, the necklace is free.
His generosity was gladly accepted. I shook his hand knowing he was once a Red Guardsman like me. I turned and asked the guard, Do you think she'll approve? He shrugged his shoulders. The old man slid the necklace in a vibrant red pouch and handed it to me. The guard and I turned to walk out. I looked at the guard. Do you ever talk? He shrugged his shoulders. On our way out, I noticed the woman had left. When we got outside the shop, I noticed Mirlise's elf guard speak to her. I secretly slipped the necklace into my pack and mounted my horse. We rode out of the village and down the narrow winding road that led us out of the forest as the sun appeared directly overhead. We quickly rode down a winding path lined of tall trees with rich orange leaves. I asked Mirlise about the woman that I had seen in the cobblestone shop with the pale complexion. She explained that only high elves lived in cities like their human counterparts. Dark elves and wood elves lived in the forests, but while there was a certain level of distrust on both sides, humans and dark elves interacted with each other. But wood elves rarely left the forests nor traded with humans or high elves, and had a level of distrust for dark elves, as they viewed them as friends of humans. Wood elves were deeply religious and would pray to the goddess before leaving or allowing anyone to enter their villages. She was insistent that there were no light elves, and when I asked about the woman in the shop, she admitted to never seeing her. I was conflicted. Are you sure that you didn't see a woman walk out of the shop? She paused and said,
I did not see anyone leave the store.
She grabbed my Red Guard's beret.
I need to keep the falling leaves out of my hair.
Use your hood, I said as she took her cloak off.
It's too hot for my cloak. What did you buy me?
She asked with a smile. I looked at her guard. She continued.
You went into a jewelry shop, but you do not strike me as the kind to wear jewelry.
I laughed. I guess I should have known better, being it is that you like to spy on me. I looked over at her and said, I want to wait for the right moment to give it to you. She smiled in return and nodded. We came out of the trees and into farming country.
It's beautiful.
Miralise gasped when she saw the tan and green valley with the rolling golden, orange, and auburn hills in the distance. The goat people from your lands work the land. They're afraid of you becoming queen, I said. She looked away from the farmland. It was true the goat people were hardly more than slaves on the southern continent. The natural beauty of the countryside drew her in. The echoing sound of a steam whistle in the distance brought her back.
What was that?
She asked. I pointed to the base of the hills. It's a train.
I was hoping to see one.
Casper looked back. You live here now. You'll see them all the time. Miralise looked to the base of the hill and didn't seem to hear him. She then looked at my pack attached to the saddle and casually reached for it. Her eyes lit up when I took the red pouch out of my pack. I told you, I said. I will give it to you on my time, when I decide. She huffed as I slid it in the saddlebag on the other side of my saddle. What is it? Casper asked. Miralise's guard leaned forward in his saddle, and Vlad even slowed his horse when I locked my eyes with hers and said in Polish, Naszynik. This translated to necklace. Her guard burst into laughter when Miralise growled in frustration. She spurred her horse on until she was next to Vlad. I heard him in the distance.
I don't speak Polish.
She looked over at Casper, who just shook his head with a grin. We rode on past the farmland and small villages. Miralise still continued to ask me what I bought for her in the cobblestone shop. I refused to tell her. In annoyance, she slowed her horse until she was beside her guard and away from me. She whispered in Elvish to her guard, but I could tell she was interrogating him, trying to find out what her gift was. He gave her an amused look, but stayed silent and loyal. Finally, she gave up, but not before she threw her head back and groaned loud enough to scare the horses.
What was that about?
Vlad asked, annoyed.
Tell me, what you got for me right now?
She demanded. Okay, I'll give it to you, I said as I reached into my pack. She smiled as I fumbled around in my pack. I smiled back at her and said, I got you some salted pork. I quickly pulled out a piece of salted meat to give to her. My joke suddenly backfired when the piece of pork that I pulled out of my pack turned out to be more salt than pork. She took it only to throw it at me later. Casper slowed his horse until he was next to me. Where did you send Vlad's son? He asked. To the light crystal mine in the mountain. Lilica has me building an end table for her. Why do you need a light crystal? I explained. I'm going to put it in the top. It'll have a lid to block the light when she doesn't need the light.
When will he be back in Marang?
He should be back in a few days, I replied. Vlad's looking forward to seeing his children, he said as he sped his horse up. Before I knew it, Miralise was right next to me with more questions. Her patience was growing thin when she asked me how much longer we had until we reached the inn. It was nearly dark and I knew Miralise wasn't up for riding all night. I had the unfortunate task of explaining to her that we travel until Vlad gets tired, and as I do from training with him, Vlad never gets tired. We passed through 2 more towns. Vlad even let us pass the inns in both towns just to irritate everyone. I looked over as we were leaving the last village and saw a slender woman with snow-white skin and silver hair standing by a fence. She turned her face away the moment I looked over at her. I slapped Miralise's arm to grab her attention.
What?
She asked with a sharp tone. I turned back to the fence, but the woman had disappeared. Just before dusk, we arrived at a small inn. The sign was so bare it appeared 100 years old. The weather had washed away the lettering and color. We weren't entirely sure what the inn was called, but it was open for service. I sat at an old table that was stained and had deep gouges carved into it. Casper sat across from me. Miralise was cozy up by my side with her arm wrapped around my bicep. I knew she was only trying to use me for the gift. As I predicted, she started to rifle through my pack. Casper asked where it was in Polish, and I pointed at Miralise's guard at the end of the table. She was ruthless, pulling all my clothes out of my bag and piling them on the table. She even started to rifle through the pile of clothes on the table. Vlad came out with a handful of keys.
I got rooms for everyone.
he said.
What is she doing?
Rearranging my clothes? I laughed. She threw her hands in the air and surrendered her search. Just give it to her already, Casper yelled. I got up and slowly walked over to her guard. I approached him and looked back at her. She was staring into my soul, anxious and uneasy. I gave her a soft smile and turned back towards him. The necklace was still safe and protected in its vibrant red pouch as I pulled it out of the saddlebag. I held it tightly in the palm of my hand. I turned back and could see the anticipation growing in Mira Lise. I walked up to her with confidence. We met eyes and she held out her hand, reaching for the box. Does anyone want to play cards? I asked as I turned away from her. She took the necklace from me and unwrapped it as fast as she could. Overjoyed, she handed me the necklace as she stood and pulled her hair back. I guess she likes it, Casper chuckled as he left for his room. She patiently waited with her back turned to me. Now you seem to have patience, I said as I struggled with the clasp. Miralise didn't notice her guard shaking his head when he left. I opened it and slowly placed it around her neck. It slid down her pale chest, a sight I knew I'd never forget. She touched the amber and observed its shine. She turned around and wrapped her arms around my waist.
Thank you,
she said, looking up at me.
I can tell gift giving is going to be fun with her,
Vlad said as he sat at the table.
My father told me that Queen Nefertari is a fierce warrior,
she said as he leaned forward in his chair, resting his arms on the table.
First, she slammed her former lover on the ground and beat him with his helmet.
Did the king know about her former lover?
Miralise interrupted. Vlad looked at her.
Yes, he was there. And then she led the army after we thought Zeta had been killed.
He continued.
I was told she got into a sword fight while standing on him, and she fought 2 men in the Battle of Fort Chinook.
Miralise's eyes were wide and curious. He added,
Let's face it, who do you think reigns over the castle?
She does have a tendency of putting people in their place, I replied.
It appears our next queen is the same,
Vlad said. I looked over at Miralise and it appeared she took Vlad's remark as a compliment, smiling with approval.
You 2 should get some sleep. We're going to leave at first light,
he said as he stood tall.
Since the storm passed and I finally received the lovely gift, I can sleep tonight,
Miralise said and stood to leave.
Really, I sleep better during storms,
Vlad replied as he left. I was surprised when Miralise followed me to my room because I was certain she would require a room of her own, or shared with her guard. I opened the door and let her proceed in before me. There was a comfortable bed just big enough for the 2 of us. She immediately jumped in and stretched her legs from the ride, questioning which side to sleep on. I started to hear questions about Lilica, Vasily, and Cheyenne. Curiosity was her middle name. I had to explain how Lilica donates to old baggers and insists that the Red Guards help those in need of assistance on their patrols.
My first impression of her was that she's an honest and genuine sweetheart. What about Vasily?
She asked. He's a signalman in the Navy. He sends signals between ships with flags. Everyone calls him Skivvy, but he hates that, I explained. We sat in silence for a minute and I laughed.
What?
She asked. I looked at the ceiling and said, Vasily is in love with Vlad's daughter, to put it mildly.
Wait, what do you mean?
She asked as she laid back on the bed and pulled me with her. I felt my heart begin to beat loudly the moment we got closer. I kept the conversation going. He tries to spend every minute he can with her when he's not at sea, and Vlad is always demanding for our father to find some reason to send him out to sea. Sometimes he demands that Vasily be sent out to sea for years. She laughed and let out a long yawn. I grunted as I sat on the bed. My back has always caused me such problems. She quickly grabbed my shirt and yanked it off.
Do you mind?
She asked as she pushed me forward. I felt the tip of her finger on the lowest part of my spine. She carefully traced it up, following the unnatural curve of my back. She followed it as it curved to the left, then back to the center, then off to the right and back to the center. Many years of blood, sweat, and tears, I said. She giggled.
So you think?
I explained the reasoning for my rejection in the Red Army. The unnatural curve of my spine caused me to be rejected by the Red Army and Navy, but I was relieved to be accepted into the Red Guard. She kept listening to my soldier banter. Unlike the Red Army, the Red Guard was tasked with protecting the cities of Cordova. My royal blood did not guarantee me an officer's position. I paused. I hope I'm not boring you with this. She touched my bicep.
Not at all. Keep going. I want to know everything about you.
I smiled and continued. My father saw to it that I started at the bottom in order to earn the utmost respect and loyalty of my comrades. She began to massage my shoulders.
Well, my dear, does it hurt?
She asked. I pointed to an area of my lower back. Right here. I felt her hands dig into my muscles as if she was kneading soft dough. She kept pressing every inch of her needle-like fingers into my spine. The harder she pressed, I grunted from the pain. She moved closer to me and whispered something in my ear, but I couldn't understand the words. Her hands suddenly felt like icicles. I grabbed the sheets and let out a gasp.
It's okay.
She whispered. Her hands slowly felt warmer and warmer as if a pot was beginning to boil on my back. She stopped and kissed me on the cheek. I turned over to look at her, confused and impressed. The pain effortlessly melted away. How did you? I asked without the right words to convey.
Sweet dreams, my dear.
She said and kissed me again on the cheek. The candles in the room blew out and we sunk deeper into the soft sheets. Her arm wrapped around my waist like a snake, gripping at my waist. I knew our relationship was growing stronger and much closer. I put my hand on hers to signify trust and honesty. My heart was beginning to melt for her, and I felt eager to protect her. After all, she was indeed mine, and mine only. In the morning, I was finally able to get out of bed without a vulgar grunt or swear, due to the pain in my back. We left the small inn as soon as we finished licking our chops from breakfast. Miralise was bundled in a dark cloak. The early morning fall chill gave her the shivers. Everyone was cold as it was an inevitable and uncomfortable winter. I hate this time of year. It's cold in the morning and hot in the afternoon, I said. She looked at me and smiled. I could see the shine of her necklace. It hung elegantly from her long neck, protected under the thick cloak. She pulled her cloak tighter. I looked up at her. Her cheeks appeared bright red. She was blushing. Sorry, my dear, I said. She giggled. I admitted. That necklace, it looks beautiful on you.
Thank you. It truly means a lot to me.
She said with an innocent smile. We passed a low cobblestone bridge which marked city limits. Welcome to Meringue, I said. We still had a short distance to go before reaching the capital city, where the buildings were stacked on top of each other in the residential district, some rising 15 stories tall. The buildings were spaced farther apart in the market district, making room for broader streets.
Where is the castle?
I pointed to the castle's spire towering over the treetops, scraping the sky. I looked over at Miralise, whose mouth was wide open. Our new home, I said.
That is the seat of power?
She stuttered.
No, the seat of power is Queen Nefertari's throne,
Vlad replied. Miralise looked at him.
My father told me that the Cordova castle was impressive.
It was true. Leluca and I still wondered how the castle was even built, considering its miraculous size.
Who built this marvelous castle?
She asked. The Camerans, I replied. We came out into a large clearing, and across from us was the outer city, Fort Chinook. That wall sealed off the plateau and protected the inner city, which at the center was 2 statues. Each statue was on either side of the castle gate, where food dogs protected the city from evil spirits. Those vicious dogs, they scared the hell out of me the first time I saw them.
The castle is massive,
Miralise said in disbelief. I'd ask you what you thought of the garden district, but there's this, I said as I removed my beret. Vlad and Casper removed their officer caps as well. I motioned to a flat empty field with a few barren trees, where the statue of Prussian and Sereb soldiers shaking hands stood tall.
It is beautiful in its way. But why do you remove your caps?
She asked. Respect. The field is a massive garden and the resting place of Red Army and Sereb soldiers that fell during the Battle of Cordova, I replied. This time, I wasn't looking at her when I responded. I was focused on the field and the emotion it conveyed. Every inch of this monument empowered me. I was momentarily gone. Miralise and her guard bowed their heads. We all took a moment of silence and slowly passed the statue. We were met by a group of Cordovan guard in front of the massive food dog statues at the city gates of Fort Chinook. They were constructed for the same reason as they were on my father's world. Miralise was awestruck by the sheer size of them.
What are they?
She asked. They ward off evil spirits and guard the knowledge within, I said. Morang's dark elf community lined the streets of the market district to catch a glimpse of Cordova's dark elfin princess. Why do we always see dark elves walking in groups and never alone? I asked as she waved to the onlookers.
Because people think we steal. So when we leave our forest, we have to stay in groups to protect ourselves.
A young Sereb girl slipped between two guards and ran up to Miralise's horse. The girl smiled and reached up to give Miralise a few hand-picked flowers, her arms stretched longer than a tree branch. Miralise smiled and took the flowers. A small trinket was returned. The young girl leaped with joy and skipped away. Miralise may have been a traveler of many needs, but she could define selflessness at any moment. We passed by a quaint bakery, and the sweet smell of croissants stopped me in my tracks. "Wait!" I called out and started to dismount my horse. "Really?" Casper replied. "Can we just keep going?" I ignored his concerned tone and frustration, knowing he'd be devouring a loaf of bread in minutes. I walked to the bakery. "Back again?" the large Sarah baker said from behind the counter. "Yes, let me get two of the usual," I said as I placed a silver coin on the counter. He put two small baskets on the counter and took the coin. "Keep the change," I said, and snatched the two baskets. "Your sister sure is rubbing off on you," the baker said. I didn't pay much attention to his comment and left without a response. I wasn't fond of speaking to strangers about my personal life. I approached Miralise outside of the bakery and handed her one of the baskets of fried dough coated in powdered sugar. The sweet smell of pastry brought her to tears of happiness.
What is this?
She asked. "Funnel cake. You'll like it," I replied. "You sure love your funnel cake," Casper sighed.
It smells spectacular, but is it any good?
Miralise asked. I climbed back onto my horse and smiled at her.
I was certainly not expecting to receive a welcome like that.
Miralise said. "What do you mean?" I asked.
Well, normally humans welcome dark elves with suspicion and distrust. The high elves have convinced humans that dark elves lie and steal.
She sighed. "Well, I'd like for you to try it before it gets too cold," I said in response. She took a huge bite of the pastry and chuckled.
My goodness, this is such a treat,
she said. Her face lit up and I could tell Casper's mouth was beginning to drool with saliva. "Those taste buds of yours, they sure are dying to have a bite." I poked at him. He looked at me and wiped his mouth. "I don't need your funnel cake. Let's keep going." I laughed. Sure, always a stubborn one. When we left the bakery, many groups of people stopped to stare. Suddenly, the blue ice dragon flew overhead away from the castle. Spirit, my mother's dragon, and the only one on the island, often flew over his island domain. Miralise tracked him with her eyes before telling me that was her first time seeing an ice dragon. It was Spirit. My mother was his master, but Cheyenne seemed to have equal control over him, and he looked to be heading towards the Sereb Kingdom. We left the market district and found ourselves on a street lined with restaurants and taverns. Before I knew it, Casper was next to me laughing. He pointed. I saw our younger brother Vasily, our brother and Lilika's twin, an awfully short navyman, light purple skin and short black hair. Vasily was leading Vlad's daughter Katerina, a short gray-skinned girl with long black hair and golden eyes, down the crowded street. They disappeared into a tavern. The Anchor, frequented by members of the Navy. I looked at Vlad, who hadn't failed to see Vasily leading his daughter into a tavern. Casper laughed harder and wiped a tear away as Vlad went to dismount his horse.
What is wrong?
Miralise asked.
"I have to rescue my daughter,"
Vlad growled.
Let me.
She replied. Before Vlad could say no, Miralise was off of her horse and in the tavern. "Don't worry, Vlad. Vasily can mess up a wet dream. He's harmless." Casper chuckled as he slapped Vlad on the shoulder.
Do that again and I will break your arm off.
I think you picked the worst time to poke a hellhound, I said. A few minutes later, Katerina emerged from the tavern followed by Vasily. She took his sailor's cap and put it on before taking off down the street towards the garden district. Vasily wasted no time chasing after her. I looked at Vlad, expecting him to take off at a full gallop after Vasily. Miralise exited the tavern. At least he's taking her somewhere nice, I said, trying to calm Vlad. Miralise silently mounted her horse and we started towards the castle. She turned to me and whispered,
I almost mistook her for one of my kind.
Vlad quickly asked,
Is that a compliment?
She laughed.
If you find having a daughter cursed with elven beauty a compliment, then yes, it is a compliment,
She said mockingly. Well, your trip is almost over, I said, putting a hand on her shoulder while she looked around at the small shops and the mountains in the distance. She appeared conflicted. You miss home, I said. She looked to a group of dark elfin onlookers that noticed she was looking at them, and they bowed their heads in return.
Well, if they can live here, then it mustn't be that bad,
She replied.
Goddess.
She asked the group. Life here, miss, will take some time getting used to, a tall male elf answered as he looked up.
Is it true that you are to be the next queen?
One of the female elves asked, and Miralise just smiled. We finally reached the base of the crescent-shaped plateau on which the castle sat. Miralise was enchanted by the sea of red flowers circling the plateau. Cheyenne used to love the field of flowers until she found out what they represented. Now she can't bear to look at them, I said.
What do they represent?
Miralise asked. Each flower represents a life cut short by war, I replied. Her jaw dropped.
All of them?
I nodded in return.
How many are there?
She asked in disbelief.
No one knows exactly,
Vlad said as we came to a stop at the road leading up to the castle gates. Our mother and Lilica came to the base of the plateau on their horses, followed by their guards.
Zeta is waiting for Medved and Caspar,
Our mother said to Vlad, and then turned her attention to me as well as Miralise.
Medved, my son. Take Miralise to a room. I'm sure she needs some rest after all of her traveling.
Don't forget about her guard.
Lilica added. It had been less than 5 minutes, and I was already being ordered by my mother. She had a distinct personality of power. Where are you two going? Caspar asked Lilica.
To get Shiana from the train station.
She replied joyfully. Our mother welcomed Miralise to her new home as they passed us. When they left, I turned to Miralise and said, You don't have to call her queen. Miralise was confused.
But she is the queen.
Yes, but she wasn't born as a princess. I explained in detail to Miralise that our mother wasn't exactly born into royalty, nor was our father. They were appointed to rule the land by Queen Kuchepsa. We started up the road leading to the castle.
I've never actually met either of your parents,
Miralise said. I thought she would have met one of them when they traveled to her lands. She explained that only her sisters had the chance to meet our father. She did, however, have the chance to meet Neffel. Well, rest assured, our dad isn't like Chuckles over here, Caspar replied as he pointed to Vlad. A few guards tried not to laugh, but erupted into laughter after Vlad slapped him on the back of the head.
Thank you, Vlad.
Miralise said sweetly.
Lilka looks just like your mother, and he is a lighter purple.
She pointed to Caspar.
But you look more like a...
My dad says that I take after him and look more like a Slav, brown hair and pale white skin, with a touch of purple for my mother, she replied.
I thought your father was a Pole.
I explained to her that he is, but the Slavs come from a variety of countries, including Poland. I'm the only one that looks the most like him, I replied. If he was a stick figure, yes, Caspar added, poking fun at how scrawny I was. Miralise squeezed my arm and just shrugged. We entered a small room with a small table near the back wall. There were 2 chairs and an old gray-haired man sat coughing in one. His left arm rested on the table. It was almost useless. You're not getting any better, are you, Dad? Caspar sighed. No, son. I'm getting worse every day. He lowered the white handkerchief he was coughing into. Even from across the room, I could see the red blood stains on it, and my heart sank. He quickly stuffed it into a trouser pocket.
Have you seen a healer?
Miralise asked. A few times this year, he replied as he took out a small vial. This is the last time I will see one, he continued. He popped the cork out of the vial and drank the liquid it contained.
What is that?
Vlad asked. Something to ease the pain, and father started but was cut off by the doors being flung open. Vasily entered, leading Katerina into the room. Vlad, I've been looking for you, Vasily said as Katerina stood behind him, clenching his hand.
Really?
Vlad replied. I want to marry your daughter, Vasily said, and our father coughed in surprise. Vlad walked up to him and straightened his back, towering over Vasily's head. He glared down at our brother, who in return glared back.
Katerina, is this the man you want to spend the rest of your life with?
Vlad asked his daughter. She didn't hesitate to reply.
Yes, father. He is the man that I want to marry.
He paused, and there was an uneasy silence between him and Vasily. He didn't move an inch nor blink an eye.
You must return home, Katerina,
he said.
But
Go home now and give your mother the news,
Vlad demanded. She left the room in embarrassment. Vlad leaned over and mumbled something only he and Vasily could hear. Vasily stiffened as Vlad turned.
Great. Now I'm going to be related to you.
He looked at our father. Welcome to the family. Vlad sat in the other chair at the table, and our father said, Medved, take Mary-Elise to get settled in. Mary-Elise, I hope you're not too tired to join us for dinner later.
No, my king. I'll be so grateful to join, and I look forward to getting to know the rest of my new family.
She replied as she turned to leave. She looked at me and quickly asked our father,
What do the red flowers mean?
I knew she wanted to prove me wrong in front of Vlad, being that she was a competitive lady. I turned back to our father. There was a poem written in 1915 after a Canadian doctor, John McCrae, lost a friend in Ypres. Because the red poppies growing in the battlefield, it inspired him to write a poem. Ever since they have been a symbol of remembrance.
What was the poem?
She asked. In Flanders fields, the poppies blow. He recited the lines he remembered, and she thanked him as we turned to leave. Casper stayed to see what Vlad was going to do to our younger brother. As I led Mary-Elise down the halls of the castle, I couldn't help but notice her displeasure. What's wrong? I asked.
Do your people hate nature?
She sighed. I looked at her out of the corner of my eye. She stayed silent and concerned. I tried to ease her frustration with a soft touch to her back.
Where shall I stay?
She asked. My parents wanted her to stay in the guest room for foreign dignitaries, but the last to stay in there a few days ago had suffered an illness in bed. I couldn't allow her to stay in there due to the severity of potentially getting ill. You may stay in my chambers, I said as I led her up the stairs. We walked down the dim hall to the door of my chambers. She looked confused when I opened the door.
Your room resembles an army barracks.
I looked at my standard issue gray footlocker at the foot of my bed. A navy blue blanket with 2 black stripes was tucked underneath the mattress while my shoes were neatly lined up underneath my bed. Everything was organized the same way I was taught during my service in the Red Guard. There was no sign of dust or clutter, only the essentials. I looked at her and chuckled. Feel free to give it a woman's touch.
Oh, I will.
She said and entered the room. She laughed.
At least it does not smell in here.
I can change that. I laughed. She shook her head.
Please tell me your brother's room is far away.
Casper is, unfortunately, 2 doors down. She rolled her eyes in annoyance and said,
Am I going to find any dirty clothes?
I shrugged without an answer. She was shocked by my lack of response. I decided to leave her be. Have fun, my lady. I closed the door before she could say anything. When I walked down the hall, I found Lilica sulking on the bench. What's wrong, Lilica? I asked as I sat down.
Dad won't see another healer after today.
She sobbed. I know.
But why? He promised that he will always be there for me. Why would he lie to me?
Lilica, he didn't mean to lie. He's just tired of fighting his illness. He knows his time is almost up. I said, realizing my words were not reassuring at all. I put an arm around her. Lilica, I know this is a tough time, but we're here for you, Casper said as he joined us. She glared at him while tears filled her eyes.
You're always being mean and making fun of me. Go away.
She growled. I do it to get you out of your shell. You're always hibernating. Casper yelled as she stood and walked away. I'm sorry, Lilica, he said as she left us. Where is Cheyenne? I asked. In her old room. She is with child. Where's your elf? Rearranging my organized room. I stood to leave. He laughed. Dinner's in an hour. We were on our way to the courtyard. We rounded the corner and were met by Cheyenne, a tall, light purple-skinned woman with waist-length black hair and a necklace, which was given to her by Miralise's father when she was just a child.
You two are still inseparable.
She shook her head. Cheyenne, you really let yourself go, Casper replied.
I'm having a baby, moron. Where's Miralise?
Turning my room into a proper elfish home, I replied. She seemed to be disappointed with the lack of greenery in the castle hall and was no doubt trying to find the perfect place for them in my room. Cheyenne forced her way between us. We made our way to the courtyard. Saphira was just outside the door. I wanted to ask her something, but Casper refused to approach her. He always hated her, or rather her wife, Nefel. I wasn't quite sure why. All I knew was that Nefel cast a spell on one of Casper's toys when he was a child. Deciding the situation was more important than him, I called her over. She was our mother's age, but had silver skin and white hair that dropped to just between her shoulders. Saphira, are you busy?
No, Medved. My duties are relatively light now that you kids have grown up.
Could you please see if you can console Lilica? She's upset, and you are her best friend. Saphira laughed and asked for an explanation. She's in her chambers, and she's upset about our father refusing to see another healer, I said. I walked with Saphira to the staircase. She replied in a soft tone.
I know how she must feel. Out of all 8 of you, she is closest to your father. It will be tough, but I'll see what I can do.
I was pleased with her response. Thank you, Saphira. Casper was waiting with a leather bag. Vlad's son is finished with your little errand. He handed me the bag containing the light crystal, and I made my way to a small stable I had turned into a workshop. Lilica had asked me to make a nightstand for her, but she continuously changed her mind on how she wanted to look. After putting it in the end table under a pan of dragon smoked glass so it would not be exposed to any other light, I made my way back to my bedchambers and had them carry the end table to Lilica's chambers. Saphira was leaving Lilica's chambers. How's she doing? I asked.
Better, but still upset.
We all are. Can I ask why Casper isn't fond of you? I knew it was a personal question, but I wanted to understand Casper's reasoning. She shook her head in disappointment.
I won't tell you to ask him, but I know he wouldn't give you an honest answer.
The door to my chambers opened and Miralise stepped into the hall. She was wearing sandals and a crimson turtleneck dress with an aggravated look on her face. Saphira bowed her head in respect. I'm sorry, but that color doesn't suit you. I looked at Saphira and said, Now I know why Cerebral women don't wear red.
It doesn't match our skin color,
she replied.
And dark elves
Miralise
share your
muttered.
skin color.
I asked Miralise if she'd rather change to something else more suitable for her. She insisted.
I do not wish to offend Cheyenne.
I
She
know
picked
that,
the
but
outfit.
Cheyenne is family now. It won't matter.
You people are
Miralise
so
groaned.
strange.
Saphira laughed at her frustration. I looked down the hall and saw Lilica making her way towards us. Miralise?
I know,
Lilica giggled as
Everliliki.
Miralise struggled to pronounce her name. Lilica, could you please find a more attractive dress for her? I asked.
Cheyenne will
Miralise
not
asked.
get mad. Who cares about how Cheyenne will feel? Anyway, she has a
Lilica
terrible
said and
sense of
grabbed Miralise
fashion.
by the hand.
It certainly looks like Lilica has a new friend.
Saphira said. She always wanted an elf friend. Are you jealous? I asked.
Well, Lilica has always been my favorite.
She sighed.